Hey everybody, this is Ben from Empire's Comics here in Sacramento, California, and we are doing yet another Google Hangout here where we get to talk to professionals in the industry who aren't necessarily here in Sacramento, but who we want to know more about. And this month, we are actually talking to Rick Remender. You guys will know him from his Uncanny X-Force over at Marvel, the 5 books he's got coming out right now, Low, 7 to Eternity, Black Science, Glee Class. Tokyo Ghost is coming back, I believe, as well. Welcome to the show, Rick. It's really great to have you down here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Of course. So what we see behind you, I'm always intrigued by this. Is that where you do all of your work during the day?
No, that is my art station. So that was when I was an animator. That's my animator's desk. And then my Cintiq and stuff behind me, I still... it was funny. I used to do animation and illustration and storyboards full time, and I would then write stories and do my typing and journaling to sort of relax and have a creative outlet that wasn't tied to my pocketbook. And then I slowly transitioned those two to where now I just write professionally and I do the art for myself. And so my kids will come down here and we'll bust out the Cintiq and so that's what that is back there. That's where most of the time it also becomes sort of a staging area for garbage. Yeah, it's a nice place to like set up my crap. And, you know, if there isn't another empty space, the animation desk is a wonderful opportunity to, you know, pile crap up and just live in clutter, basically.
So how did you get into animation? Obviously, you're an artist. We don't get to see you do much. You just did a Low cover a couple of months ago, which blew a lot of people's minds. A lot of people didn't realize that you were an artist until that.
I grew up just writing and drawing, and it was always sort of a wonderful escape from a lot of chaos that was going on, and it's something I gravitated towards. You know, my mom read me a lot of Greek mythology as a kid, so I guess it was that coupled with, you know, being a Gen Xer who was at the beating heart of the Star Wars years. You know, I'm born in '73, so that's you know, that stuff all kind of cooked me into a fiction freak. But I guess so. I was 20 years old, and Fox Animation was moving to Phoenix, where I grew up, and so my parents convinced me to send in a portfolio, which I was certain was this, you know, total waste of time, but I got lucky, and I went in and took an animation test and had, I guess, a bit of a proclivity towards doing it, and they hired me. And so, yeah, I started animating when I was 21, and I did that till, you know, I was 25, and then I would go in and out of that and storyboarding, and I started making comics when I was working at Fox, when I was working on Anastasia, in order to get away from the monotony of animating special effects for Anastasia, which was never high on my list of things that I had to do as a human. I would get together with my friends at lunch, and we would listen to Frank Zappa and you know, old punk rock, and talk about making ridiculous comic books. And we cooked up the stupidest idea we could, which was Captain Dingoberry, and he has a dimensional vortex in his butt, obviously, that leads to where he imprisons the villains that he captures by sitting on them. And he has villains such as Sir Richard Pumpaloaf, who has a penchant for French loaf. That's right out of a Frank Zappa song. So he would turn people into bread and gingerbread men, and then he would. This is a all ages pod. I'm trying to think. He would butter the bread, and so anyway, we cooked up all these sort of ridiculous comics and started making them, and I fell in love with it. We self-published the first few issues and distributed it through Diamond and sold, I think it was, 6,000-7,000 copies of the first issue, and people actually wrote in letters, and I was in love with it. And that was what I always wanted to do, was comics. And so as I would work at places like that, and I worked at Warner Brothers and Electronic Arts, and up and down Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, I worked at all manner of studios. I would still make my comics at night, constantly working nights and weekends to do the comic book stuff. And eventually I tricked some people into buying them, and then tricked some more people, and then eventually I tricked enough people that I am, I don't know about respectable, but I'm a thing that I can live off of it. So that's the story.
Because the Captain Dingoberry was actually that was your very first work, correct?
That was my first comics. Yeah, we did an anthology that we self-published before that called Sideshow. But my story in there was Captain Dingoberry, and it was just the stupidest thing in the world, and we just had a lot of fun doing it. So we rode that as long as we could. Eventually moved it over to Slave Labor Graphics, and we did 7 or 8 issues of it before finally going like, hey, all right, we've had our fun. And then once that was over, I was immediately, off and running on more projects. And I have not been able to stop developing more projects for 20 years. It's just, as soon as I'm wrapping up one, my docket's already got the next one ready to go. And eventually that'll probably kill me, but it's a fun road to the grave, I suppose.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have your hands in a lot of projects now, and I mean, I guess while you have the momentum and while you have the audience, you might as well put as many out there as you possibly can, correct?
Well, I don't want, you don't want to oversaturate. We've got a system, we take a break between arcs in order for everybody to catch up, and so that the books aren't rushed. We allow ourselves some time so that we're not constantly hitting that 30-day cycle of, go, 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 go. And so by doing it that way, I'm doing now less than I was doing during my heyday at Marvel in terms of output. But I'm working on a number of titles. And so it demands that I write outlines far in advance and make sure that I've got the stories sort of planned out. And then we, pick away at them as we go. But, this was always my dream. My dream was to be able to work with great artists and to tell stories and make my own comic books and collaborate with people and have fun and enjoy the process and be able to pay my bills doing it. So I'm very fortunate in that 20 years later, it is a dream come true.
That is cool. And you talk about how you stagger it and you alternate. What's really been appreciative to people around here, at least, is that you've started putting in the back of your books updates on when things are coming. So it's like all of a sudden they're gone and we're waiting and wondering what's happening to you in the book.
Yeah, I mean, it's usually every 4 or 5 issues. We'll then take 2 or 3 months off, and that allows us to recharge and not ever hate the project. Because the monthly grind, when we're in it, like right now, I've hit one of those points where all the books are coming out. So I'm putting Glee Class to bed. I'm putting Low Issues to bed. I'm putting Black Science to bed. I'm putting 7 to Eternity to bed. And on top of that, writing the scripts for next month and working on the Glee Class TV show. And all of that piled up has meant that, I'm a puddle more than a man. I just sit in my office 12 hours a day, drinking coffee, just doing, working and working and working. And I'll go out and run to oxygenate the brain so that my body doesn't completely atrophy. And then I will continue to write more and more. This isn't the norm, though. Usually we've got it staggered, and we try to keep everybody abreast that, when we take these little breaks, that it's either that or we have, endless stress and tons of fill-in issues. And I think a fill-in run or a fill-in arc or fill-in artist is fine, but at the same time, you don't want to do it on the regular with these things, I don't think.
Well, especially since each one of your books is really kind of branded with the individual artists that you've chosen for them. I mean, each one brings a unique feel to the book, and it feels like you took some time to really decide who was going to do them. I mean, Scalera over on Black Science, he could really feel the fast pace of the book. Tokini is unbelievable on Low and brings that one to the forefront for me.
I mean, yeah, these guys are top level geniuses, and that's not hyperbole. I mean, we don't really get involved in a lot of the industry stuff. You know, I don't really do shows anymore, and Tokini doesn't. Jerome does a few. Mateo likes to do them. I think Wes only does a few. We mostly just wanted to make comic books. And so, you know, these guys all co-own the books. We're 50-50 partners. We develop them together. You know, I might have a germ of an idea or a Bible up front, or I might just have a germ of an idea, but we talk on the phone all the time and we workshop these things, and we're all invested and in love in these characters. And so, you know, it's the best looking line of comics in comic books, period. And those guys are why. And not only do they make A-level, top level, the best art, they really genuinely, they kill themselves. Like these are, you know, you look at the quantity of books that a guy like Mateo has put out in the last 4 years. He's a workhorse. And, you know, you look at the level of detail he or Jerome or Greg, or you look at the panel count and the detail of you know, and the storytelling process that Wes puts into Deadly Class. You know, these are guys who are very passionate about what they're doing and pouring everything they have into these books. And ultimately, that's why we got into this. Otherwise, we should just, you know, go be accountants or something if we're gonna, you know, just grind out and get the thing done. And you know, it's I'm very fortunate with the arts that come in.
Well, let's talk about Low for just a second, because Low is one of my favorite books on the shelf. Every month when it comes out, I've got a special way I do it. I put on certain music. I have a certain beer. It's such a beautifully written book with great artwork. But what I find most impressive about it, as an old school fan of a lot of European stuff, I think that Low is probably the closest we have on the shelf to classic heavy metal-esque style science fiction. Now, is that a huge influence for you?
For sure, and that's obviously like the nicest thing to hear. That Low is an attempt to recapture all of that stuff, and you obviously can't do that without an artist of that caliber, of Greg's caliber, and he really brings that aesthetic. I look through a lot of, I think, you know, the Jodorowsky and Mobius Incal stuff, and you know, I grew up when I found superhero books. The only other option you had that wasn't Marvel or DC, if you were buying comic books from your 7-Eleven, like I was as a kid, was heavy metal. And so those books ignited my imagination in that they were so inventive. Every one of those strips were so lavishly illustrated, and there was so much love put into these just absolutely innovative and unique worlds. And you know, that's one of the reasons that you know, I got into it. I remember that then led to seeing guys like Robert Williams do stuff in Thrasher magazine, which led me to, you know, researching and finding Zap Comics and him and Robert Crumb and all those guys. And as much as I loved the superhero stuff, that stuff was what actually inspired me to make comic books, was to see all that is possible. So I you know, that's a very nice compliment. And I think that, you know, ultimately with Low, you know, the hope is that we can achieve that, and maybe a new generation of people, you know, will see that there's more possible with this than just, you know, a lot of what we get in the mainstream.
Now, will there be a Low oversized hardcover? You've got it for other books. Tokini's artwork would be fantastic.
Yeah, we just revealed the artwork for that. I'm actually looking at it as my screensaver.
Excellent.
We revealed the artwork for that a few days ago. It's a double-page bit of insanity where Greg he painted every character from the book in this streaming fluid wave of insanity. It's something where one of the things we were seeing is that, you know, I've been tracking trade sales. Low is this strange book in that it's one of the best-selling books that I've ever had in terms of trades, and a lot of that is outside of the comic book market, which is not that one is better than the other, but that's always been a goal of mine, is to try and find ways to appeal to people that aren't already sort of coming into the shops. And so Low is just this monumental freight train in trade paperbacks. But we wanted to wait until we had sold out of, we'd printed 120,000 copies of the first trade paperback. And we've almost sold out of all of those. And that seemed like the right time to then get the hardcover out. But so we wanted to, stagger it a little bit before we did the hardcover. So the hardcover will come out right around the same time as the fourth trade, which was also part of the plan. Ultimately, I think that you get a whole new breed of readers with the hardcovers. People who have heard about it and they see this giant thing and this beautiful artwork and they pick it up. If they like it, then they can come back to the shop and then pick up trade volume 4 yes. So to answer your question in 50 or less minutes, yes.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. I'm glad to hear it because I keep seeing the other ones come out, and I've been waiting for that one. Now, over at Giant Generator, you actually are capturing quite a few genres with your books. I mean, you've got Deadly Class, that fits in completely different than everything else you do. You're doing science fiction. You've now got fantasy over at Seven to Eternity. Is there anything else that we can expect or that's coming to kind of show us where you're?
Nothing I've announced yet, but I have 2 other books in the works, and what I'm doing on those is trying to get 5 or 6 issues finished before we even announce it, and that way, down the road when we finally get ready to release these, we'll have such a wealth of work finished prior to that we can then ship the book at least for the first year or maybe year and a half without any of those gaps while we catch up. And it's hard because some of the people I'm working with are, again, more of the best artists in the world, and we're all very excited to talk about the projects, but we're not going to until we're going to try it this way. We're going to try to have so much of it accomplished that we announce it, that we put the book out, and that it ships monthly regularly for at least 12, 13 months without any breaks.
Okay, so you've already picked the artists, and you're moving forward on this currently. Yeah. Okay, excellent. I'm looking forward to seeing what you guys got there. So, have you ever considered going back to mainstream? I mean, I know you have a lot on your plate, but you had a pretty good run over at Marvel with everything from some Deadpool stuff to Uncanny X-Force, Punish. Is this something that could potentially be on the plate for you, or are you done?
There's a couple things that a couple itches that I might need to scratch at some point. But I don't know. I've had some really wonderful books offered to me recently, and ultimately, when I went over the reality of getting back into that end of the business, it just didn't make a lot of sense to me. Ultimately, I think that I'm just really happy right now, and I'm happy not. I always equate it to trying to play on trying to play it on the big stage to 1 million people versus playing a small club to people who are actually there for you. People who read Seven to Eternity or Low or Deadly Class or Black Science or Tokyo Ghost, they're there for the artist. They're there for me. They're there because the book intrigues them. They're not there because there's a continuity addiction or they feel that they have always read Scarlet Witch, so they're going to keep reading it no matter what. And playing to those size audiences while I'm also trying to do something that's unique and has voice became more frustrating than rewarding for me, I think. And so I'd rather play my songs I'd rather put together my own bands, and I'd rather play clubs where the people are there to hear us than I would to, further serve as research and development for Warner Brothers or Disney. Now, that's not to disparage them. I think, like I always say, we need a healthy Marvel and DC, and I'm only able to do this because I was able to get my name out and to build a bigger audience working at Marvel. So I'm very grateful for my time doing that. But I'm just, it's impossible to overstate how much happier I am now doing my own stuff.
I imagine it must be nice too, because you get to do exactly what you want. I mean, I don't know personally what the editorial side of Marvel is, but I imagine there's got to be a lot of demand for you to keep things a certain way or fit within certain boundaries.
Every book is different. Every editor is different. All the demands are different. Like I think when we were doing things like Frankencastle, and they kind of let us go nuts, that was that and Venom and X-Force. In 2008, 9, 10, 11, when I was doing those books, nobody was clamoring to get their hands on Venom or X-Force or the Punisher. And the joy of that is that we're kind of off in our corner, and we could then bring the sensibility. So like what Jerome and I and Tony and I had been doing on Fear Agent, we were then able to sort of bring some of that into books like Punisher and X-Force and then Venom. And then I could bring in guys like Greg Tocchini and Phil Noto and all these, Robbie Rodriguez, all these great artists I wanted to work with. And we were just kind of off in our corner. It wasn't like X-Force had to establish continuity for other books. It was like, that's X-Force. We'll do whatever you want. And then obviously when you start taking bigger and bigger books and you're working on Avengers and Captain America and things like that, then that changes. There's more company involvement. There's more editorial involvement. And you're dancing through more raindrops trying to make all the continuity stuff work, which, can sometimes lead to, happy accidents and things being cool. And sometimes it can lead to a complete train wreck that you can see coming 100 miles away, and you just have to ride that train into the wall. So, there's pros and cons to it, but it's like I said, I grew up with that stuff, but I was pretty done with superhero comic books by, 94, 95. I pretty much gave up. At that point, I graduated and moved off to reading entirely like Fantagraphics and Vertigo and finding more heavy metal and European stuff and, the Jamie Hewlett Tank Girl. And there would be like, I think the closest to superhero for me that I cared about anymore was like Hellboy and following that kind of stuff. So, by the time I got into superhero comic books in 2007 or 8, it was already, it was like digging into my childhood, and it was fun to play in that sandbox, but it ultimately wasn't the end goal for me. Right now kind of is the end goal. So as long as they can keep this ship going and the numbers are great and people seem to be enjoying the books, I'm probably going to just keep making my own comics.
Okay, that's fair. I mean, if you can do what you want to do and you don't have to worry about any of that, why would you not do that? When you did Uncanny X-Force, though, it definitely didn't feel like a normal superhero book. You have the same kind of science fiction spin on that I see in a lot of the books that you're doing now.
I think that more than anything at Marvel, X-Force, Punisher, and Venom were all sort of directly born out of the kind of stuff I was doing in my independent work at that time. A lot of the same artists, a lot of the same, themes, a lot of the same tone. So, a lot of the things that I was doing, I have people that will read X-Force and then read Fear Agent, and they're like, oh, this is like an indie, prequel. There's like, all these thematic things and the thing anyway. So the storytelling sensibility and the way that I was handling stuff back then it all drifted into that. And I think that the longer I was there, and then the bigger the books got, where all of a sudden, I pitched Uncanny Avengers, not recognizing that it made me now I have to dance through not only the Avengers, but the X-Men continuity. And you're not writing the X-Men, you're not writing the Avengers, you're doing this middle book. And it ultimately leads to it was a very difficult process. I'm incredibly proud of so much of that run, especially, like the first 18, 19 issues leading into the end of the Apocalypse stuff. But man, it was gnarly difficult. It was a lot of hours and a lot more, it was a lot tougher to sort of figure out how all it fit in continuity more than just telling a story. Where it was X-Force, I was very fortunate in that all the characters I was using were unique to my book, or they were Wolverine or Deadpool, and ultimately those guys, were in a couple of other books. But what I was doing was their secret off hours, so it all kind of worked. And I think that helped the book. I think that there was, the reasonable explanation of how all of these books are being made with, how all these people are in so many places at once. I think we got lucky and kind of navigated through that with X-Force.
Yeah, no, it seemed to work really well. And Uncanny Avengers was almost like a nice little conclusion to some of the stuff that you started in Uncanny X-Force. But you mentioned just a little bit ago that Glee Class has been picked up. Why don't you tell us a little bit about that and what's happening?
Yeah, it's at Sony, and then Joe and Anthony Russo are producing it. And we have a network. We've turned in the pilot. The script is done. It's being. There's a lot of. This is one of those things you hear people say. You're talking about your own work, but there's a lot of buzz around it. People seem very excited. Everyone who's read it has been effusive. We've had people come to us and the showrunner and everyone, and unsolicited offer like, wow, that's great. And I got a call today with a lot more good news. They came back and wanted a whole season outline. So fingers crossed that, we end up with a pilot. It looks like it looks good, but I've been down this road before. We just don't know. Probably have some news within the next month, I would hope.
So how does it work then? Did somebody know about Glee Class? Did you pitch Glee Class in particular out of the books that you're currently working on?
Well, the process, an executive at Sony read the book, and I went in and had a meeting, and we got along, and I really loved their ideas for it and what they wanted to see happen. And it's some of the same guys who worked on Breaking Bad and a lot of other things that I and Better Call Saul and a lot of things that I really love. And so we teamed up with them, and then teamed up with a showrunner and a writing partner, a screenwriter pal of mine came in to co-write it with me, and then Joe and Anthony Russo contacted us, and they responded really well to the book, and they wanted to produce, and I wanted them to produce. I'm a huge fan of Arrested Development, and I think that their second Cap movie is one of the best superhero films that was ever made. And so we all got together and workshopped this and worked the outline and pitched it, and we got a network, and then we spent, starting in January, we spent January, February, March, April writing the pilot, and then rewriting it literally 30 times. And just rewriting it and rewriting it and rewriting it until everyone involved thought that it checked off every box, and they all loved it. And that was an arduous process. I've gone through similar, situations, but never have I done that degree of rewriting. But ultimately, I think that we'll see if it paid out here in a little while. But we did our end. I'm very proud of the script, and I think that anyway, I don't want to jinx anything. Let me knock on wood.
Excellent. Hopefully we will hear some news coming from you soon about this. Another one that I think would make a great movie is Last Days of American Crime. Has that ever been talked about?
I wrote the first screenplay, and it's been rewritten, and we just got the new draft in 2 weeks ago. And apparently there is funding in place. So, and the rewrite on the screenplay is fantastic. I really loved it. The same guy who wrote Oblivion with Tom Cruise a few years ago did the rewrite on it, and it's really fantastic. So that one is in motion, and fingers crossed we'll have news on that one soon too.
Okay, are there any other projects that are being talked about that you own the rights to?
There's a lot of big stuff going on with Fear Agent. And there is some really cool stuff happening with Low and Black Science, but nothing I'm able to report on specifically just yet.
Okay, well then we'll keep our eyes open and see what happens. I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens with Low. Hopefully that'll be at the top of the list.
I'm working on the Low pitch. I took a break from writing the Low pitch to do this call. So it's in the works.
Well, excellent. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir, for taking the time to do that, because that obviously is extremely important.
I'm glad you think so.
So we actually have a few questions from some viewers that they wanted me to ask. One gentleman asks, if you went back to Marvel, what would be your dream character? Like, if you could do anybody, who would it be?
The problem is this. Any of the dream characters that I have, my big problem with it is that all of the books have too many other books. So when let's say if it was my dream book would be Spider-Man, and I want to write the Amazing Spider-Man. I'd also only want to write it if there weren't like 7 other Spider-Man books. I don't know if the world where that ever happens it probably doesn't exist. But for me, the difficulty with any of that stuff is that I really found that writing books with characters that were in 5 other books left me very frustrated and dissatisfied as the tonality would change or where they're at changes. And that's par for the course. Even when I was growing up with the Jim Shooter era in the mid 80s, when I was a fanatic for that stuff, there would be there was 2 Spider-Man books. There was 2 different storylines, and you had to get your head around, like, in this storyline he's dating the Black Cat and doing this, and over here he's fighting the Hobgoblin doing that, and just be okay with it. There's 2 storylines. But when I go through any of that stuff, I was going to take over the X-Men books for a while, and one of the biggest dilemmas was trying to navigate how what I really loved about X-Force is that the 3 characters that I predominantly worked on and actually could do character work and what was Warren Worthington and Betsy, Psylocke and Phantom X, because they weren't in other books. And so I was able to actually write character arcs and romances and do things that weren't then being contradicted by other writers in other books. And so, yeah, there are some characters and there are some things that I'd like to play with, but at the same time, the way that mainstream comic books work now, where all of these books are either double, triple shipping, and they've got, there's not just Uncanny X-Men and New Mutants. There's 5 X-Men books and 5 solo books, and it's just I really don't like that. I don't want to have to do that.
All right, I think that wraps it up. It looks like Hog the Undead, we already talked about that. He asked about the inspiration for Low, which we went over. Tony Asaro would like to know why you don't draw more. He was enamored by that cover you did on Low, and he'd love to see more of your artwork on some of your own stories.
Yeah, I one day I've got a book planned that I would write and draw. that's very sort of slice of life. And I draw for myself a lot. I've got the new Cintiq, and I'll open up a file and just spend a few hours doodling at night. And it's beautiful because I don't have to show anybody. I don't have to get a paycheck for it. I don't have to have any comment. It's just art for pure expression's sake. And I'm in a unique situation where I have the opportunity to work with quite literally the best artists in the world and write scripts and dig into stuff with them. And so it's difficult to turn down opportunities to work with great artists so that I could, draw my own stuff. So I just sort of focus on the writing on this table, and then at night I go over to that table and I draw for myself, and I find that the art's cathartic and fun again. It's not a commercial endeavor anymore.
All right, that's fair. That is fair. So we actually have two people ask the same question here. Amos Hatton and Cruz De Leon want to know, if you had to pick like 3 must-reads in comic books, what would they be?
From any era, from ever?
From anything.
Oh, God. Dan Klaus 8-Ball would be number 1. I'm trying to just think of not the of what honestly, the obvious one, but you can't ignore it, is Daredevil, Born Again. It's a perfect comic book. I mean, that's Frank at his peak, and Mazzucchelli at his 8-Ball, Born Again. These are all such obvious answers, but for number 3, what was like my personal? God, that's so difficult. Can I just say like anything Wally Wood drew?
Yes, you can. Wally will make it very general in that regard, but it's not a bad one to pick on that one. So let's see. Let's try and hit a couple more. Sean Patrick Lawrence. We already talked about the properties in development, and okay. So this one was kind of interesting. Amos had one more question. He was talking about Mojo dialogue in Uncanny Avengers Annual. He seems to think is printed at another creator. Is that correct?
Well, at another creator?
Yes.
Trying to think of Mojo dialogue. It was pointed at an aspect of the industry, of the comics industry for sure.
Okay, but nobody in particular. He just seems to think that it represented somebody and the way that they tell stories. If he could guess the person, I would affirm it or deny it. He already did. Should I say it?
Sure.
It was Hickman.
No.
Nope. There we go.
It was not a commentary on Hickman. No.
Okay. Good. We love Hickman around here too. Let's see here if there's any other questions. I think we covered a lot of them, actually. I do personally have a question for you. You're obviously married and you have children, which you said. So why in your comic books do you hate them so much?
Do I hate children?
You put them through the ringer, Low and Black Science.
Well, yeah, but I mean, isn't life a ringer? I don't know. I mean, my kids saved my life, so I think that it's all different. I'm exploring in Black Science. What I wanted to explore was I was at a point in time where I was doing way too many hours of work, even like more than now, because I was trying to get my image books launched, and I was doing all my Marvel work, and that was an examination of somebody who, though they were doing it for good cause, had become sort of an absentee parent in Grant McKay. And then I added on, infidelity and a bunch of other stuff to really escalate the drama with his guilt. But that was an examination of and a reminder to myself. And I'd often write black science and then just take the rest of the day off and go like, all right, grab the kids, we're going to the beach, or we're going to go out. And I would write this guy who had forgotten what mattered, who, you know, the line in there that I always built it on was, what's the importance of saving the world if you lose your family to do it? In that case, it was a sort of a reminder to go out and live your life. In the case of Lo, my mother's this eternal optimist who, frustratingly so, where she would sometimes just do things hoping for the best, where we would move to a new city and she'd never been there. And you were just like, okay, you know, I appreciate the optimism, but a little due diligence. And so, you know, a lot of what goes on in there is, you know, this, you know, mother who has this undying sort of pathological optimism, and how her kids are both disdainful and exhausted by that, but underneath it are secretly kind of feeding on it. And as the family is broken up, I think that, you know, that's something that is just good drama. I think we all have families. We all have, you know, mothers and fathers and brothers and sisters and people that we care for and have different relationships with. And so in those are two very different kinds of families and two very different stories. But a lot of that is about, you know, a mother's love for her family and what she'll do to try and safeguard the world and offer them a future in Lo. And then in Black Science, the other side of that, where a father who has been doing his best to protect the world from the coming environmental catastrophes, who has lost his family in doing so. There's just, you know, it's a lot of universal context, I think, is why I was drawn to it in those two books. And I don't think there's no, you know, Tokyo Ghost doesn't really have any kids. I mean, obviously we see Led and Debbie grow up. And then Deadly Class, those kids just, you know, that's just magnifying the awfulness of high school through High School for Assassins, you know, and the various things that I lived through in my own misspent teenage years, sort of translated through that heightened reality.
So a couple questions have popped up in the thread with what you've been saying. You mentioned that your children saved your life. Is that just being, you know, is it expressive about it, or did they literally save your life?
Yeah, probably literally. Yeah, I think that, you know, for me, finding something outside of myself that you know, I say this all the time. I don't think that you truly understand what love is until you have kids. You can love your friends and you can love your parents and you can love your spouse, but it's entirely a very different thing than when you have you know, these wonderful little human beings that are dependent upon you for everything. And I think that having something outside of myself that meant so much and brought so much joy, and you know, it's such a natural part of being a human is having kids. And when that chapter of my life opened up, I think that it, you know, it definitely gave me a renewed reason to strive to be the best person I can be. And you know, it reminded me of a lot of reasons, you know, why living is pretty cool.
Okay, nice, very nice. Now, with your creative process, you were talking about how some characters were based on feeling that you had or you wanted to focus on, and some were based on people like your mother. Do you have a general way of starting a character? Is it usually based on someone, or does it vary?
It varies, and even though like a character like Stell, I might start with, you know, write what you know, right? I might start with something like my mom's irritating pathological optimism, and then I mix in, you know, I was in therapy at the time dealing with some stuff, and a lot of what I was learning in therapy about how we change our thinking, we change our lives, and positive outlooks, having external results. That stuff definitely had a personal, resonance, and so did obviously Marcus. I was taking a lot of those journal entries of his out of my old journal entries from back in my late teen years. But then you add in all these other attributes and you fictionalize them. And that's always a fun exercise, because then you're sort of looking at them through the lens of, there might be aspects of them that are, taken from reality based on somebody you know, but then there's all these other fictionalized aspects that mix in with that to create something new and very different when you're considering their motives and their choices.
Okay, the Brandon Pascal just wanted to let you know, he put a message up that Deadly Class was extremely important to him. He said it helped him get through high school. So by channeling that high school years of your own, you seem to be passing it on to other people.
I mean, that's huge. That's really nice to hear. One of the things that I wanted to do with that book was to not sugarcoat the experience and to try to make it authentic while still telling it in sort of a heightened reality battle royale world. And that was something that there wasn't a lot of that I can remember. Love and Rockets was great, but when that was coming out, I was still, that was college age and older. It wasn't an authentic look at high school. It wasn't an authentic look at the ugliness of it. And for me, it was a especially difficult time, and I was not a well-behaved young man. I was troubled, and so I wanted to try and, like I said, and honestly capture that, and that was why my journals were so important. So it wasn't a 40-year-old trying to write about being a 17-year-old. But every time I would read some shit that I wrote, some of it I would cringe, and I'd go, "Oh, get it, shut up!" I'm not writing that, and I'd have to go, "Okay, well, are you rewriting this? Is the 40-year-old rewriting it, or is it a 17-year-old's impression of a girl or a situation or high school or depression or drug use or any of these things? Is it going to be true, or is it going to be you polishing it so that you're not embarrassed by it?" And I always went for, in that, if it was embarrassing and true, then it went in.
Well, it seems to have done its job. It really does resonate with people. We've got a ton more questions, but we're going to have to cut it off because I want to talk to you about one more thing before I let you go.
Okay.
Here in Sacramento, we have a ton of people who are creating their own comic books. They're writing, they're drawing, they're working together with people. Is there anything you can tell them, a little advice, maybe something that you do or something that can help them to keep them going?
It's such a tricky one. I want to be the inspirational speaker and help them with the fire. But the reality is that it's also very difficult. I started making comics in 1997 and gave my life to making them for so long with no results that it had a very detrimental impact on me. The hours, because I was working full-time jobs to pay the bills. And then I was just taking my own creator-owned comic books, or taking jobs inking the Avengers, or taking jobs drawing Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, or whatever, and stitching together while I would then develop a Fear Agent or a Nightmare or a Strange Girl or Blackheart Billy or any of the books I did. And then it's a tremendous amount of work. You build it, you make it, you throw it out into the world, and year after year I'd throw these books out into the world and there would be silence. There was no reaction. And I think that what I would say is you have to find this really disgustingly apathetic, sick place where you're just going to make them for you, and if no one else reads them, then it doesn't matter. Then it doesn't, because the expectation of people are going to notice this one, or this is going to be the one that, all that expectation is going to fuck up your joy of creation, and ultimately you can't control that. I don't think that I think that when I got to a point where it was like I made my mind up in 2005 after doing comics for 8 years that I don't expect it to work, but I'm going to keep doing it as hard as I can. And so I was penciling The Last Christmas, written by my buddies, storyboarding at Electronic Arts full time, and I was writing Fear Agent and writing. And I was working basically from the moment I woke up until I went to sleep at night, 7 days a week for years and years and years and years. And eventually things snapped. People bought some books, and Axel brought me in at Marvel and gave me some books where I could do things that people might actually see. And I got some breaks, and I got lucky, and I got that tenacity and that hard work. It did lead to some lucky breaks. And I think that it's very difficult if I had to go back and do it again, if I knew how long it was going to take, would I do it again? No. I'm here now, and it's great, and I love my job, and I'm very fortunate. I don't know if I could do it. If I had to go back and go like, okay, well, your 20s and your 30s, they're mostly going to go away while you sit alone in a room grinding out, pencils and inks and scripts and animation and storyboards. It might have been nice to have some more vacation during those 20 years. But again, I think it's also a sickness. I think if it's in you, the most optimistic thing I could say is that anyone can do it with the right amount of love and passion and life thrown into it. But I do think it's your whole life. I think that I quit a job at 20th Century Fox. I quit a job at Warner Brothers. I quit a job teaching at the Academy in San Francisco. I quit a job at Electronic Arts. I quit a job at Wild Brain. I quit every good job I ever had. As soon as I had $10 in the bank, I was like, forget this. And I went back to grinding out comic books. And when you're gambling and your whole life is the bet, there's no net. There was no, well, if this doesn't work out, I'll do that. And there was dark periods where at 33 years of age, my wife is sick. I can't afford health insurance, because it was a pre-existing condition. She's got we've got no money. We're 40 grand in debt. We're living in a garage on next to the highway in San Francisco. And you wake up and you go, oh, I have thrown my life away. And you realize how much when your life is on the line, every book you put out has your life on that book. So when Fear Agent's coming out and Strange Girl's coming out and and I went back in those days when I was doing those books, every one of those books was like, okay, it's partially art, it's partially expression, it's partially lottery ticket. But, A, you do your best work when your life's on the line, and B, you give it everything you've got. And that doesn't guarantee success, but I think it exponentially increases the odds of it.
Okay. And I honestly, I think it was nice that you didn't come out the gate just keep working, it's going to happen. The idea that you're doing this for yourself, I think, is the most important thing, because as you said, it takes a lot of work and it may never get seen, but if you enjoy it and you're doing it, then keep doing it.
And look, I mean, you have to get to that point. You have to get to the point where you just, like, external validation is a nice thing. People reading a book and saying like, hey, like talking to you and you responded to Low, or somebody who Deadly Class helped them through high school. What a magical thing that is, that another human being connected with some shit that I made and cared. Like, it's incredible. Pardon me for dropping the S-bomb.
No worries.
But the the other side of it is that you have to kind of not care. You have to kind of not care. There was years that I cared. I remember when Fear Agent Volume 3 came out, I spent like 4 months. I inked 2 of the issues, and I was looking at I had all my Wally Wood stuff up, and I was, you can go look at The Last Goodbye, and the 2 issues I inked, and it's like Tony Moore, like dumping his ass on the pencils, and I spent all these, weeks workshopping the script and trying to make it, but there was no Eisner nomination for it. I remember that like leveled me. And that was the next level of like, what does that even mean? What does that even mean? Do you care about, like, how many bands do you love that have Grammys? Do you like a Grammy? Or like, how many of your favorite movies were Academy Award winners? Like a couple, maybe. But that external validation, that need for that star on your forehead, that kills art, and it kills the joy of art. It's a negative inspiration for creating something. The need for praise, the need for validation, the need for peer response. Those things are cancerous, I think. And so if you can get away from that and still find a way to make your work because you love to make it, and do it till year after year after year, until you finally, get good enough and then find that break, I think that you can make it happen or not, or you end up, in a gutter someplace, selling your body for a hit of the sweet crack.
Wow, it was one or the other. You were either going to be successful or in a ditch.
There's a middle ground, I'm sure, but I work in extremes. I don't see middle.
Well, perfect. Thank you very much for joining us, Rick. It's been great talking to you. Thank you for supporting local comic shops like this and making sure that you take the time to get the Sacramento people involved in your life. We really enjoyed having you on, and you guys can find him on at Giant Generator. That's where you'd like people to go?
Yeah, giantgenerator.com or rickremender.com. Do people still go to websites? Well, if they do, those are websites that exist. They can go to those.
And if they don't, make sure you follow him on Twitter. You're really active on. And,
I am. Probably more than I should be, but that's where I take my breaks anymore and read about the decline of modern civilization.
And then write about it afterwards. And speaking of that, I don't want to keep you from a very important script that you're supposed to be writing for Low. So thank you again for coming down, and we really appreciated it.
Cool. It's good talking with you.